regular army at the outbreak of the Civil War is about 14,000 men and officers all told. By the time you get to Gettysburg, between both the Confederacy and the Union, you have over 1.5 million men under arms. We don't have time to rewrite the playbook. Basically, the only major change that had been made in the last major change, what was known as Hardee's light infantry and rifle tactics, was the speed that you marched in doing your various maneuvers changed. That was all they did. They were still using linear tactics because the objective is to throw a wall of lead under control at a specified range and target. Now, a lot of you think, well, why didn't they fight more dispersed? Well, one is they were afraid they couldn't keep the men under control. You have to understand, you know, in addition to the technological difficulties, you've got some social type difficulties, which is, well, okay, officers are basically middle class or upper class individuals, and they can be relied upon. The enlisted force may not be, this is not so true. And this was particularly a mentality in the regular army. Now, this isn't necessarily so true in the volunteer army, where, you know, you have all kinds of people coming into the volunteer ranks from a variety of stations. But the thing is, it was felt you had to keep the men under control, and therefore you usually kept them pretty tightly controlled. Sometimes you did have skirmish order where the men would be spread out. And that would be used basically to feel the enemy. But, you know, you usually had to be very, very well drilled to execute that type of maneuver and keep the men under control. Now, another intricacy that comes from doing this loading and firing, again, when you're packed in tight, is the fact that this is a muzzle-loading weapon. It loads from the top. And the men were trained to do this in very close ranks, which meant everybody basically had to be doing the same move the same way. Pardon me, maybe not necessarily at the same time, but what they did was they taught the men to load and fire in 9 times. There's 9 separate procedures for loading a musket. And Sergeant Major Meller here is going to demonstrate as I give the command so you can see. Imagine if he's got people all around him. Load and fire in 9 times. Load. The weapon is brought down diagonally in front of the body. Muzzle pointed away from your face, and also the muzzle pointed away if there was a man, if there's somebody here in the front rank, away from the back of his head. Handle cartridge. You'd reach back, unsnap your cartridge box, which is a leather box. You pull out a cartridge, which is a paper tube that has a lead ball in the base and approximately 65 grains of powder on top of that to push it. The lead ball itself is almost an ounce of pure lead, so it's a fairly heavy slug. Tear cartridge. You would tear the top of the cartridge open with your teeth. One of the primary requirements to get into the infantry was you had to have 2 opposing front teeth among the 8 front teeth in your mouth. Otherwise, you couldn't go in the infantry. Now, you know, you laugh about this and we think this is amusing. In countries in Europe, such as Russia, where there was conscription, and when you got conscripted in Russia in the mid-19th century, it was for 25 years. It was essentially a life sentence. Some of the peasants used to take, particularly if they were good, healthy males, and break the 8 teeth out of the front of their children's mouths so that they wouldn't get conscripted. It's universal. This is how everybody loads their musket. So you've got this musket cartridge torn open. You now have it at the muzzle of the weapon. Charge cartridge. You would pour the powder down into the barrel, force out the ball, and you would loosen the ramrod in its pipes. Draw rammer. It's done in 2 motions, everybody going the same way. Otherwise, you got people spinning things in different directions, clanging, battering, lose all sorts of cohesion. Ram cartridge. cartridge would be rammed in, forced the ball down onto the powder in the breech of the weapon. Return rammer. The rammer is brought back up again in 2 motions and put into the pipes. Prime. At this maneuver, you take a half step. You narrow yourself as a target toward the enemy. You bring the weapon up above your cap box. You take out a percussion cap and place it onto the vent. Now, when you get to this point, if you're obviously ready to engage the enemy, you would be directed to fire. But the normal procedure at this point would be shoulder, arms. And everybody gets back to this position. You know they're all loaded, because although you're trained to do it in 9 separate steps, the command you would get in the field would simply be load. And you would know to do all 9 steps.